There is much more exciting hot news about Hans Niemann. And I'm gonna tell you what just happened on the chess.com server. You know that last week Hans Niemann got permission again to play on chess.com after he settled with Magnus Carlsen and chess.com in their case, which was taking for about 1 year. But Hans Niemann is back and he is allowed to play in these online tournaments, and he was paired with Vladimir Kramnik. Look what happened in this game. Vladimir Kramnik, the former world champion, is playing with the white pieces against Hans Niemann. Vladimir Kramnik plays the move 1e4, and after e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. Look what Hans Niemann is doing. He is so provocative with his choice of playing the move knight f6. This is the Berlin defense, and especially playing this move against the living legend, the leading expert on this opening, Vladimir Kramnik. You need to have some courage to do that. Knight f6, this move was a very well-known move for hundreds of years. But in 2000, Vladimir Kramnik reinvented this move, the Berlin defense, to use it in his World Championship match with Garry Kasparov to win it and to dethrone Garry Kasparov from the World Championship title. Well, this is something very unusual. Castling kingside, knight takes e4, d4, knight d6. Bishop takes c6, d takes c6, d takes e5, knight f5. And now the queens are swapped. At this time, back in 2000, everybody was thinking that white should be better here because he has a better pawn structure because of the double pawns for black, and black is no longer allowed to castle. But nowadays it has been established that these bishops, they are just really good, and even that the pawn is on e5 means that black is able to set up a blockade on the light squares. It's a very interesting clash of bishop pair versus the pawn formation, but nowadays we know this is quite okay. But Kramnik is playing it with the white pieces against Hans Niemann. Let's see how that goes. White goes for the move h3, bishop e7, knight c3, and Hans played a very solid move, knight h4, offering the exchange of knights, so that later on this bishop can be developed to the f5 square. Knight takes h4, bishop takes h4, bishop e3. White is ahead in development, but how to make use of it? There are almost no pieces left on the board. Black played the move h5. This is a very important idea in a lot of Berlin structures to prevent white from further expanding on the side where he is stronger. h5 is a very good move. Rook 81 check, king e8. The king stays in the center, and now white tries to improve its knight by rerouting it to d4. Bishop f5 played. Now the knight comes even with tempo to d4, but the bishop is doing okay on d7. Look, this knight on d4, it's sort of dominated by the bishop and the pawn on c6, so the knight cannot really go anywhere. There's no pressure along the d-file by the rook, so I think black is okay. White is now trying to advance its kingside majority with the move f4. He is about to play the move f5. If that can be played, white is going to be better, because you always got to reckon with pawn breaks like e6 or maybe f6. Therefore, black needs to act immediately. And the move c5 was played to challenge the knight. The knight gotta go away. It went to f3, but now black is in good shape. Bishop went back to e7, and after rook fe1, the bishop comes to f5. And now we see black is totally in control. The bishop is, of course, attacking the pawn, but most importantly, it does prevent the white pawns from expanding further. White played the pawn to c4, rook went to d8, b3, b6, very solid play by both sides, but I think white is not able to make any further progress. Even having these pawns on light squares will prove to be problematic later on. White played the move bishop to f2. Maybe ideas with bishop h4 can be considered to force the exchange of dark squared bishops. Depriving black from the bishop pair is an interesting idea. But look, black went for the move h4. That's a very committal decision, but I think it's absolutely fine here. The main idea is that the pawn on g2 cannot easily come forward, because if you ever go to g4, black is going to capture en passant. So the basic point is that the pawn on g2 and the pawn on f4, they are somewhat separated from each other. So it's not a very nice chain, and of course altogether it's really difficult for white to advance that kingside majority. On the other hand, that pawn can also become a target, but for now, the bishop on e7 and the rook on h8 are still guarding the pawn pretty well. Rook takes rook, king recaptures, and after rook d1, the king comes over to the other side. So why is the king going now to c8? Well, black wants to keep the option open of getting the rook into play, offering the exchange of rooks on the d-file. White played king f1, the king comes to the center, and now very important move, black plays the move a5. Now you're thinking, what is black's idea? Well, very simple. If white thinks, okay, I'm going to block that pawn majority, fix it on the queen side, that allows the move bishop c2. The rook is hanging, and now the pawn on b3 is no longer protected by the pawn on a2. So white cannot really play the move a4 himself. White played instead the move king e2, black played king b7. Look at this bishop, it's a really good piece covering the entry square from the white rook, which is not able to infiltrate on any of these squares on the d-file. Rook to d2, and now very interesting moment, as black has this option always to play the move a4. Even now the move a4 is very interesting, with the idea to destroy the pawn formation. If white is going to take, maybe rook a8 can be played, but on the other hand you also need to keep your pawn defended. It's twice attacked and it's also twice defended, so I'm not sure black really wants to move the rook away. But anyway, even if you would take the pawn, it's clear that these pawns on the queen side, they become more vulnerable. They are a target for either the rook, the bishop can attack it, maybe even the king can come in. So I think a4 is a very attractive option for black. Instead, black played the move king c6. So now the king is actively placed on c6, but after a4, the king went back to b7. So what was the idea of king c6? Well, maybe there are ideas to go for the move b5 to open up the queen side one way or another. But after a4, the king has nothing else to do there, went back to b7. White played king e3, and now the rook went to h5. I'm not sure this is such a great move. It's often seen that the rook can be developed either to h6 or to h5, but when the rook is standing there on h5, there are little tactical ideas. For instance, bishop takes h4 is a very interesting move, was not played in the game. The idea is that if you take with the bishop, now white will regain the piece with excellent prospects, because now white's pawns are mobilized and things are looking very difficult. Instead, after bishop takes, rook takes h4 can be played, but then all of a sudden you have the clash of bishop pair versus a rook. But after g4, white's pawns are maybe really strong as well. This is very difficult to evaluate. Anyway, it didn't happen. White made a waiting move, rook e2, the king went back to c8, knight g5 was played here, with the idea that if black is gonna take, and you take the pawn on g5, the pawn on h4 is hanging. But in general, black has two bishops, these bishops are looking great, pawn on f7 is under threat, you can just move the pawn to f6, and after e takes f6, bishop takes f6, this bishop is now gaining in strength because of the pawn on e5 is no longer there. Knight went to e4, bishop d4, the bishop comes in, king to f3, rook h8, and of course now the exchange of bishops will help black to improve the pawn structure. It's a passed pawn which can be nicely supported by a pawn, by a rook. Black is clearly better in this endgame, so bishops cannot really be swapped. Knight g5 was played, and now bishop f6, back again. Rook to d2, and here I think black is doing very, very well here. I like the bishops, but the question is how to break through. The machine really says that after bishop c3, for some reason, white is in deep trouble. But frankly, I'm struggling to see it especially in a blitz game. It's really difficult to figure out what's happening. But the thing is that the rook also got to retain control over the c2 square. Otherwise, the bishop is going there. If you go rook e2, now apparently bishop g6 with the idea to go bishop h5, you can feel that the bishops are really posing some big problems for the white king and rook. Okay, it was a blitz game. Mistakes are made. Bishop d7, so bishop can come to c6. Rook, bishop e3, rook e8. King f2, bishop f5. Bishop is active again. Knight f3. Now the bishop goes to c3, attacking the rook. Rook to d1, bishop f6. Rook to d2. is this a silent draw offer? No way, black is better here. Black wants to make progress, but how are you going to make progress? Well, machine says rook f8 is a good move, but please tell me if you understand the idea. I'm struggling to understand. So this move played by Hans, this is absolutely insane. King b8, I really struggle to understand, but I think he is just trying to put pressure on the clock as well. He plays a random move, but this move doesn't really give away anything. But on the other hand, if white really wants to fight here, maybe it's time to interfere with the knight on e5, sacrificing the pawn, and with opposite colored bishops and rooks on the board, I'm really thinking that white should be able to hold it somehow, because it's very difficult for black to reach that weakness on b3. Didn't happen in the game. Rook to e2 was played, but that's a mistake, allowing black to go rook d8. Now it's black who wants to enter with the rook on d3 to attack the pawn on b3. Rook to d2, and now the rooks are getting exchanged, but this is exactly what black wanted, because now the bishop can come to c2, attacking the pawn on b3, and even though it's still protected by the knight can't really go away. King e2 was played, king c8. Now the king comes into play, and you see that the knight on d2, it's frozen. It cannot move, because otherwise the pawn on b3, as well as the other pawns, are likely to drop. This is the main drawback, long-term problem for white in these structures. And of course, Kramnik is the man who invented himself all these kind of theories. Bishop f2 was played, king to d7. The king is just about to walk in. If you don't do anything, if you make waiting moves, just to illustrate you that the king will come. If you protect the pawn, bishop comes to d4. If the bishop is gone, the pawn on f4 is hanging. If you protect, then eventually you put a bishop here. And this is some sort of zugzwang. Look at the power of these bishops. The white pieces cannot move. If you take on d4, c takes d4, king e1, bishop c2, pawn on b3 is a problem. f4 is going to be hanging as well. I think this is a very instructive endgame by Hans Niemann. In the game, knight f3 was played, but of course then things are going from bad to worse for white, because pawn on b3 is taken, king d3, protecting the pawn, bishop takes a4, pawn number 2, white wins one pawn back. And what should white hope for here? Some counterplay with its pawns on the king side, but also, black has a really strong pawn, and if you keep the bishop on the board, even bishop a1 or bishop b2, it's a really strong move according to the engine. But Hans played another move, bishop c6. Bishops are exchanged now, and I think Kramnik made a really insane decision here. Of course, black is about to take on f3 with the idea to come over with the king to wrap up these pawns on the king side, and black's outside passed a pawn is decisive. What should white do? Come back with the knight to e1, avoiding that exchange. Next move is going to be g4. The knight is helping in defense. Black is better, but black will have to prove himself here still. Instead, knight h4 was played, but now after a4, the pawn is about to run. g4 was played, and now killer move, bishop e4 check. The king is in trouble. If you take the bishop, then it's a3, a2, a1. Nothing can be done against the promotion because that knight is too far away. Had it been on e1, you see that knight c2 could have been played in that case, stopping the pawn. Instead, bishop e4 is on the board, king c3, the king got to stay close. Now c6 is played, so black is about to go for the move b5. White is looking for counterplay as well, but after f takes, king e6, g6 played, king f6. Look at this knight, it's totally stranded because it's dominated by a bishop standing on 2 squares distance. The knight cannot return into play. The king is controlling the g-pawn. Next is going to be b5, b4. It's game over. Vladimir Kramnik lost with the white pieces against Hans Niemann. Against the Berlin defense, you cannot get it more insane like that. And funnily enough, a rematch was offered, and now, Hans Niemann playing with the white pieces against Vladimir Kramnik in their second game. Hans opens the game with the move 1e4, and Kramnik just instantly played here the move f6. And you see Hans looking. What is this? He's trolling me? What is his intention? Well, after about 20 seconds of thought, Hans played, of course, the standard move d4, occupying the center, and we all know that f6 is a really bad move, but now the move g5 was played, and of course, this is the losing mistake. This is the fool's mate with reversed colors. But Hans, instead of playing here this move queen h5, checkmate, this is the fastest way to win in chess with the white pieces. Instead, he just resigned. He didn't want Kramnik to troll with him. He just declined the fool's gambit. And, well, this story, people will definitely talk more about it. And I think this is a silent accusation by Vladimir Kramnik against Hans Niemann. Why is he doing it? Why did he accept a rematch? Why he's playing against Hans Niemann in general? He played one game. Did he really think that in that first game in the Berlin defense that Hans Niemann was cheating against him? Frankly, I really don't think Hans was cheating in that game at all. I think he played a nice game, and honestly, Kramnik should know better how to play the Berlin with the white pieces. Especially, he knows all the ins and outs of this opening. I'm very surprised why Kramnik did it. We would like to hear his opinion. What is this message? I mean, you can say it's just an online game. Many people have resigned after only 3 moves. But for me, this is absolutely bizarre to do this in this current situation. And well, definitely we will hear more, and maybe more people will follow the footsteps of what Magnus had been doing in the past, what Kramnik is doing now against Hans. I'm not sure. Let me know your opinion, and I'm curious to hear from you. And hopefully, well, I'm not really sure if I should really hope, but it would be nice to see some normal games of Hans playing against the strongest players in the world. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. More updates coming soon, very likely.